Welcome to The Explainer. You know, some of the most famous stories in the Bible are also, well, they're the most disturbing. So today we're going to ask why. Why on earth are these violent, shocking tales even in there? And what could they possibly mean for us?
All right, let's just jump right in with a big one. Take your son, your only son, whom you love, and offer him there as a burnt offering. I mean, there is just no way to read that without feeling a deep sense of shock, right? It goes against every moral instinct we have, and believe me, it's not the only one.
So that's the real question, isn't it? Are we supposed to take these as literal history, as actual commands from God, or is there something else going on beneath the surface? Today, we're going to explore a really fascinating theological take that sees these stories in a whole new light, not as rule books, but as incredibly complex stories designed to mark huge turning points in human morality.
Okay, so first up, let's talk about Noah's flood. It's a story most of us probably heard as kids, right? The animals, two by two. But if you try to read it as a literal historical event, you pretty quickly run into some big problems. So, the source material we're looking at points out something simple but really powerful. The ark supposedly lands on Mount Ararat. Now, for the people this story was originally for, the ancient Israelites, Mount Ararat was hundreds of miles away, in a totally different country. The geography alone is a huge clue that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't meant to be a straightforward history lesson.
And this is where it gets really interesting. You see, the biblical story of the flood didn't just pop up out of nowhere. It was written in a world that was already full of flood myths, especially from Mesopotamia. But look at the differences here. In the Mesopotamian myths, the gods are just annoyed. They send a flood for no real reason. It's chaotic, it's meaningless. The biblical story completely reframes this. It gives the flood a moral reason, human wickedness, and crucially, a hopeful outcome with a new covenant. It's basically making a direct argument, saying, our God is not like your chaotic, capricious gods. There's a moral purpose here.
And that brings us to what our source calls Noah's paradox. Think about it. God destroys humanity because it's violent, by using an act of incredible violence. It feels like a huge contradiction, right? But what if that contradiction is actually the entire point?
This is the crucial takeaway. The story of the flood isn't really about geology or history. It's about theology. It's like a giant dramatic reset button. The storyteller uses this act of ultimate world-ending violence to wipe the slate completely clean and introduce a brand new foundational law for all of humanity. Do not murder. The sheer shock of the flood is meant to hammer home just how important this new rule really is.
Okay, so with that in mind, let's go back to that absolutely chilling command given to Abraham. If the flood story was this dramatic way to introduce a new law, what in the world could be the purpose of the story about Isaac?
Well, the source we're using argues that the genius of this story is all in how it's told. The pacing is just masterful. It's deliberately slow to build this almost unbearable tension. You feel every single silent step of that 3-day journey, and then it all culminates in that innocent, absolutely heart-shattering question from his son.
It's exactly like the quote says. The whole thing shifts from a normal pace into this excruciatingly slow film. The action just crawls at the most critical moment. We are forced to watch every detail as Abraham binds his son, as he raises the knife. The storyteller makes us, the reader, feel the horror and the tension of that moment. It's incredibly effective. But why? Why put the reader through all of that? I mean, if the point was just have blind faith, the story could have been told way more simply. The fact that it focuses so intensely on the psychological horror tells us that it's building towards something really specific, something incredibly powerful.
And here's the key to unlocking it, according to this interpretation. The entire story is designed to function as one huge, monumental no. It walks you right up to the edge of the most extreme religious act you could imagine in the ancient world, child sacrifice. And then, at the very last second, has God himself step in and say, stop. Think about the power of that. By staging and then stopping this one, single, ultimate sacrifice, the story makes a definitive statement that echoes through time. This is not what God wants. It's the story that signals the end of human sacrifice, making way for something entirely new.
So when we look at these two stories together, what does it teach us about how to read these really difficult parts of the Bible? Well, for one, it tells us we need a different kind of approach.
Basically, this way of thinking gives us a kind of interpreter's toolkit. Instead of just getting hung up on the shocking details on the surface, it encourages us to read like a detective, to ask questions like, what is this story trying to achieve? What new moral idea is it trying to introduce? And just as importantly, what old cultural practice is it trying to argue against?
The really crucial thing here is to look at where the story lands. The flood story doesn't end with destruction. It ends with a covenant against murder. The story of Abraham and Isaac doesn't end with a sacrifice. It ends with the divine rejection of human sacrifice. So the real meaning isn't found in the disturbing journey. It's found in the moral destination.
Okay, so why does this matter? Why should we care how we read these ancient and frankly troubling stories today?
Well, according to this analysis, if we read these stories and think they're endorsing the violence in them, we're missing the point entirely. The idea isn't to admire a God who would flood the world or demand a father kill his son.
Instead, think of them as incredible documents charting our moral evolution. They're like literary battlegrounds where brand new ideas about justice and mercy and what God is actually like are being hammered out in these dramatic, unforgettable stories. They use extreme situations to make extreme points about a new moral way forward for humanity.
And that really leaves us with a final question to chew on. Maybe these stories have lasted for so long precisely because of what they demand from us. They challenge us not to just sit back and read passively. They force us to look past the shocking surface, to analyze the clues, and to become detectives ourselves, uncovering the incredible drama of a people wrestling with the biggest questions we can ask.